Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today at this EAT Forum. I'm used to giving podiums and speeches, so please bear with me if it seems a bit mechanized. I work for the UN system. But the reason why I'm here today is to really talk about the connection between energy and food and how it's deeply profound. Energy and food nexus are essential. Agriculture uses producing, processing, distributing food. There needs to be a reliance on energy for machinery, for transportation. So a lot of these things are linked when we talk about the global goal of net zero by 2050. So to put this in perspective, 30% of the total consumers of the energy demand globally is actually the agri-food business. So that is huge, which means you cannot decarbonize if you do not take agriculture very, very seriously. It's also good for us to understand that this isn't a nice to have or a choice, it's actually an imperative, as food systems account for a third of global greenhouse emissions at the same time. As we talk about these things, we also need to understand that, unfortunately, you still have 2.1 billion people that have no access to clean cooking solutions. So the way they cook their food is harming them. Household air pollution, according to WHO, shows 4 million people die every single year because of how they're cooking their food. Let me put this in perspective. Because a mother wants to provide food for her family, she is going 4 or 5 hours a day to collect fuelwood, which is killing her and her child as she's cooking. That is how bad the divide is currently. Household air pollution is not just seen as a public emergency. It's also profound when we talk about inequality, or we talk about progress with gender, education, and poverty eradication. You can't live a dignified life without energy. It's just not possible. And food. So the climate-food nexus is also something that's very visible. And when these things come to fit each other is when we look at the cold chains and the link from farmers to market. I mean, I'll be speaking to the people who know this the best by saying 13% of all food that's produced is lost before it even gets to the consumer. That is a huge statistics. And this is due to inadequate refrigeration and insufficient cooling. In parallel, the global demand for cooling is projected to triple by 2050, and I don't know how much of that is actually going to the agricultural sector. This is driven by the population growing, the rising income, and the escalation in heat distress. So as we look at all these things, we have to make a decision in this room today. If all those cooling targets and refrigeration targets are met with this outdated technology, we're just going to come back in 20 years trying to transition out of this again. And one of the continents that are going to suffer the most, which already is being left behind, is my continent, Africa. To provide even deeper context, 10% of all electricity demand is cooling now. Cooling for big buildings like this, cooling for big corporations. However, the cooling that we're talking about for a mini-grid provider or a cooling solution for a farmer or smallholder farmer needs to be prioritized just like we do all these other solutions. So we are pushing a lot in terms of investment in sustainable cooling, but cooling that is efficient, affordable, and powered by clean energy, because we have developed all the technology to make sure it happens now. This won't only safeguard investments in improving nutrition, but protect livelihoods and reduce emissions. As Sustainable Energy For, we've been doing a lot of work on what do you mean by sustainable cooling? You know, when you're talking to ministers of agriculture or environment, what does that really mean in real life? You know, because everything we talk about in many of these conferences, if it does not translate on ground, then why are we here? One of the things we realize is a factor of why this has not been taken up as electrification has been taken up is people just don't have the data. Where are the cooling needs? How do you tie that into agricultural communities? How do you bring that to the position on ground to see how the private sector comes in? So we've been doing a lot of work with countries on when they do integrated energy planning, it's not just about electrification. It's not just about leaving people behind. It's married that you have to say, what are the clean cooking resources you need to power your population, and what are the cooling needs to power your population? So we've gone far in thinking back in the day when we thought we would just provide a household one little lantern and a charger and pat ourselves on the back and say we've done something. That is not good enough. With the heat rising that we are finding all over the world now, the minimum we should provide is enough lighting, enough cooling, and at least enough energy to run a couple of fans. With that needs to come the need for a small fridge as well. Because we've talked about the loss from farm to consumer, but we never really talk about the loss in the household because there's no adequate cooling solutions. So we do a lot of this work geospatially, but more importantly, we also train governments to be able to do it themselves. Because one thing we do know is that in this world of geopolitical tensions, things change. And if you do not give the tools for the government and the policymakers to be able to make these differences themselves and not to always rely on us and then not behind any paywalls or anything like that, but models that they can adapt, it's just not going to work. Things happen, climate change, politicians change as well, and you have to invest in the institutional knowledge in government to be able to take this ahead. You also have to invest in the private sector. You need to encourage the private sector when they're talking about electrification to understand that they can also put cooling targets and clean cooking targets with that. I see my clock is ticking, so I'm going to quickly move along. The most transformative thing that I think I've done in my career working with my colleagues at SC4 is now focusing on clean cooking in schools. We know the clean cooking target is huge, but we also know that 480 million children now get access to school meals. Many of those on my continent, that is the only meal they have a day. Most of these, at least 80% of these schools, are being powered by biomass. Again, if you are powering by biomass, the great thing is you're increasing the amount of children that get food, but you're destroying the environment as you do it. So coming together and having clean cooking solutions, e-cooking solutions in schools, or better cooking solutions in schools is what we are working on. We've already done a number of schools in Tanzania, and we're trying to do it across Africa with partners like World Food Organization, the World Bank. Everybody really needs to be in the tent. So I guess, my last kind of call for action is that, please, as you're working on your ecosystems, there's a wider energy angle that we are willing to discuss with you and talk to you about, to say that you don't have to be energy experts, but maybe we can tell you the tools that when you're developing your agri projects or your agri businesses, you look at a clean energy solution that helps the environment, but also leaves no one behind. Thank you for listening.